Hey, welcome to our Wednesday night recap. For those that are just kind of joining and hanging out with us, my name is Brian, and I have the honor to serve as the student pastor here at Kingdom Life Church. And we are really excited that you are spending just a few minutes with us, hanging out and reviewing what we talked about on Sunday. I know we have a handful of people that are with us on Instagram, and if you are watching on YouTube or Facebook, let us know. Leave a comment so I can kind of give you a shout out as we go through the message tonight. Now, I will say this: I know that on Wednesday nights, what I really would love to try to do is to answer some questions that you guys might have had on Sunday, or address something that you were like, I'm not really sure about this or how this kind of fits in to the message. So if you have a question or a comment about the text that we're looking at, or about any of the points or anything that we're talking about as we're going through this, feel free to let us know. And because of the way we have everything set up, we should be able to, I should be able to see those in real time, or at least like a 15-second or so delay, and then answer those as we go through. Now, again, the way this is going to work is we're going to review the message from Sunday. So if you weren't able to hang out with us on Sunday and you missed the points, you missed everything we were talking about, we're going to review that tonight together. If you missed what we were even talking about, we're in a series called The Parables of Jesus. So the Parables of Jesus is just what it sounds like. We're going through, as a student ministry, some of the parables of Jesus. The first week we looked at why Jesus taught in parables, and we looked at more specifically kind of the parable of the sower. And last Sunday, this past Sunday, we looked at the parable of the weeds. Now, you're welcome for not making I haven't made a single that I recall, like, let's get into the weeds with the parable of the weeds joke. I haven't said it. I haven't made the connotation unless you count what I just did, and then I'm sorry. But I'm a dad, so I get to say dad jokes, and they're funny to me and cringeworthy to you guys, and I kind of know that, and so that's one of the reasons I kind of like to do it. But if you were wondering what text we were going to be in, it's the same one we were in on Sunday. If you missed the message on Sunday, it is Matthew chapter 13, and we are going to be looking at, starting off the parable of the weeds, which is verses 24 through verse 30. And I'll kind of recap it, and then we'll actually read the parable. So Jesus taught this parable to a huge crowd, and he said, basically there was this farmer, and this farmer had a field, and he planted good seed in the field. Now, the problem is, while his servants were sleeping, someone came along and put a bunch of bad seed in with the good seed. And so when the wheat came up, that was the good seed. The bad seed came up, and that was the weeds. And so his servants immediately went back to the master and said, hey, master, didn't you plant good seed in your field? Because right now it's got a lot of weeds. And so the master said, certainly I planted good seed, and this was an enemy that has done this. And so his servant said, well, do you want us to pull the weeds? And the master said, no. And we talked about how that was kind of odd, because if you or I had a garden and we had weeds that came up in the garden, we would immediately say, yeah, you gotta pull those weeds out, because they're going to compete with the good seed, and they might actually take nutrients from the good seed. But that's not what the landowner said. The landowner said, no, don't pull up the bad seed. Don't pull up the weeds yet, because you might damage the good seed. And so he said, we're going to let them grow up together, and then when harvest comes, I'm going to send my workers into the field, and they're going to gather the weeds first in bundles to be burned, and then I'm going to send them to gather the wheat and put it in my barn, because that's what I want. I want the good seed. I want the wheat. I don't want the weeds. And so we looked at what that means for us, how that even applies to us, because you might be hanging out with us tonight and you're like, I'm not a farmer. I'm not, anybody that is going to have to deal with like wheat or weeds. I don't plant gardens. I'm not that person. So how does that pertain to me? Well, we're going to look at that tonight, but I want to actually read the text first. So if you have a Bible, you can go ahead and open it to Matthew chapter 13. And in Matthew chapter 13, we're going to start again in verse 24. And so it says this. I want to make sure you guys are going to be able to see it. I'm going to put it on the screen for you. But it says this in verse 24. It says, He put another parable before them, saying, The kingdom of heaven may be compared to a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while his men were sleeping, his enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and went away. So when the plants came up and bore grain, then the weeds appeared also. And the servants of the master of the house came and said to him, Master, did you not sow good seed in your field? How then does it have weeds? And this is what the master said. He said to them, An enemy has done this. So the servants said to him, Then do you want us to go and gather them? And he said, No, lest in gathering the weeds you root up the wheat along with them. Let both grow together until the harvest, and at harvest time I will tell the reapers, Gather the weeds first, and bind them in bundles to be burned, but gather the wheat into my barn. So this was the parable of the weeds. And we talked about what that means for us because, again, if you're not familiar with how agriculture works and you're like, I'm not a farmer, I don't understand how this applies to me. Well, when Jesus begins to explain this parable in Matthew chapter 13, verses 36 through 43, he explains something very clearly. And we'll read that text in just a moment. But just so you know going into this, Jesus said the good seed was planted by the Son of Man. And it was the sons of the kingdom. And so he said basically the good seed are my disciples, or followers of me. And so that means that if you're a follower of Jesus, then you and I are the wheat. We are the good seed. And if you are not a follower of Jesus, then Jesus referred to those people as the bad seed, the seed sown by the enemy, or the weeds. And so I'm not saying if you don't love Jesus right now that you are a weed, right? I'm not saying that, because here's what we gather when we recognize these are the two different people that Jesus is talking about. We recognize in all of this that you and I are in the weeds. We are in the weeds. We are wheat among the weeds, right? But this is the other thing we noticed, and again, this is primarily for followers of Jesus right now. If you're not necessarily a follower of Jesus, hang on with me for just a second, because we'll get there, right? But the first thing was that you and I are in the weeds. We are among the stresses and anxieties of life. But we also recognized that God is letting us stay in the weeds. And we talked about how that was weird, and we talked about really how everything that all of these points that I'm kind of laying out for you tonight could be kind of prefaced with believe it or not, because sometimes it's really hard to believe. Like, God, why would God leave us among the weeds? And when we hear Jesus' explanation of this parable, it makes it a little bit more clear. So here's what I'll do. I want to go ahead and read through Jesus' explanation of the parable, where he lays out all of the players, he lays out what all of this means, and then we'll talk about why God is letting you and I stay in the weeds. Because there's a really good reason that he's letting us stay in the weeds. So let's look at Matthew chapter 13. We're going to pick up in verse 36. It says this. It says, Then he left the crowds and went into the house, and his disciples came to him, saying, Explain to us the parable of the weeds of the field. And he answered The one who sows the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world, and the good seed is the sons of the kingdom. The weeds are the sons of the evil one. And the enemy who sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are angels. But then he even continues past that with a deeper explanation of this parable. He says in verse 40, just as the weeds are gathered and burned with fire, so will it be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send his angels, and they will gather out of his kingdom all the causes of sin and all lawbreakers, and throw them into the fiery furnace. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. He who has ears, let him hear. And we talked about how important that last phrase is, right? Because that last phrase, he who has ears, let him hear, is Jesus' way of saying, those that hear this parable and that are seeking me, this parable will serve to draw them into me. It'll serve to help them find who I am. It'll help if they're seeking God and they're looking for a relationship with their Creator, this parable will help them do that. And he says, basically, if they're not seeking me, this parable sounds like nonsense, right? Just how we talked about it, it's kind of weird that the landowner would let the weeds stay when you and I would probably pull the weeds in a garden. And so we talked about how this means that this is one of those ways that Jesus is drawing people into himself. And so what does it mean for us as followers of Jesus, as disciples? Well, here's the first thing that it means for us is that in this season, among the weeds, God is letting you stay there for a purpose. You have a purpose among the weeds, because if we recognize all of the players, and we recognize specifically that Jesus says that the harvest is at the end of the age, then what that means is that there's a purpose for the wheat right now sitting among the weeds. Right? And the purpose that we have is that we know from not just this, but other areas of Scripture is that your and my purpose is to tell other people about Jesus. Right? To be a part of them hearing not just parables, but the gospel in general and responding and going from and crossing that line from death to life, right? And we talked about how it was kind of going with this analogy. It means that the wheat gets to tell the weeds about the landowner. And how exciting it should be that we get to tell others about the one that loves them, about the one that cares for them, about the one that created them. We get to play a part in that, and we have that purpose. But then the other thing that we have to recognize is that that is not the sole purpose of a disciple. Right? As much as we talk about the importance of sharing your faith and about telling other people about Jesus and about letting the gospel be proclaimed in every area of your life and every place that you go, telling people about Jesus is not your ultimate goal in life. Right? If you're a follower of Jesus, it should not be your ultimate goal. And here's the weird thing, is that the ultimate goal that you have is the same goal that every single person on this planet has. And notice I didn't say every single disciple, because every person that ever has existed or will exist has the same goal. We will be ones that give God glory. Now, how we give God glory may look a little bit different. We talked about how our ultimate purpose as followers of Jesus is to give God glory, and how that is the same purpose that everybody has. And here's how: because at the end of the age, at the harvest, right, the harvest that Jesus is referring to, the ultimate purpose of everyone will be to bring Him glory in one of two ways. We will either be evidence of God's grace and mercy and love, or we will be evidence of His divine justice. Because if you've been in Kingdom Students or in our student ministry for any length of time, you've probably heard me talk about God having kind of this complementary dual nature. It's not a contradictory nature like some like to kind of tout. It's a very complementary nature. We don't have time to explain all of that tonight, but suffice to say, the complementary nature that God has is He is 100% fully loving, and He is at the same time 100% fully just. And so we, as creations of the architect of the universe, will either be evidence of His loving nature because we've given our life to Him through Christ, or will be evidence of His justice by giving us over to our own desires and giving us what we rightfully deserve as creatures that have rejected our Creator. Right? So we exhibit one of these two dualities at the end of the age, right? During the harvest. And so we talked about how our purpose ultimately is eternal, especially if we're followers of Jesus, because it means that we get to spend eternity bringing Him glory as evidence of His loving nature, as evidence of His forgiveness, as evidence of His grace, as evidence of those that recognize that they were lost and undone without Jesus, and because of Jesus, we get to be reunited with our Creator again. So that was the 4 points, right? That's the 4 points we had on Sunday. That's the kind of nature of the message in a nutshell. And let's see, we have been hanging out for about 20 minutes. If you subtract the countdown, then like 20, probably like 19-ish minutes, which is kind of perfect because I try to keep these between like 15 and 20 minutes. And so here's what's going to happen next. In not quite, but a little over 10 minutes, we're going to jump over to our small group, right, via Zoom. So if you are used to kind of how we do things on Wednesdays, here's how we do them. We have a Wednesday night recap here, live streamed at 6 o'clock, and then at 6:30 we flip over to Zoom and have our small group. So if you're like, how do I get into the Zoom small groups? Here's how. This is the info that you need to get onto the Zoom call. This is the URL that you have to kind of old-fashioned type in to your internet bar to get onto our small groups tonight. And it looks like you guys can't see it on Instagram, so I'm going to try to move it to where you can. And I know I'm like 15 seconds or so delayed, so it'll take a minute. But once you see it, you'll be able to move over and hang out with us on Zoom. Again, I want to thank you guys for hanging out with us. Thanks, Miss Grant, for hanging out with us on YouTube. Thanks to, I think one of the Fergusons was on Instagram hanging out with us, and a few other people. Can you type it in? I will do this. I will see if I can add it after the fact. I can't immediately, Quandra asked if I could type in the URL for the Zoom call on, I guess, Facebook. And so I can't type it in right now, but I can do it after the fact. So I'll go and add it as a comment after the fact, after we wrap this up, so you can just click it there. Actually, it would probably be a better idea if I just send you a text, Quandra, so that you can make sure that your kid gets on. I don't want to just do names other than those that are actually on live with us, just in case people are concerned about privacy and that kind of thing. I totally get that. But I will go ahead and try to get this sent out to either some of the groups that, I know some of our students have either GroupMe groups or group chats and I will try to get that sent out to those so you guys can get in as well. But with all of that being said, that was kind of a recap of what we talked about on Sunday. Thank you guys for hanging out with us, and we will see you guys in about 10 minutes on Zoom. We're going to start those at 6:30. Thanks for hanging out with us tonight, guys. We'll see you in a minute on Zoom. Bye.